In the heart of the city where skyscrapers clawed at the heavens, there dwelt Eli Turner. His existence a stark contrast to the opulence that towered above him. His abode, an apartment as cramped as it was barren, mirrored the desolation that had crept into his life. Once a burgeoning freelance graphic designer, Eli had painted dreams onto digital canvases. But now, his screen sat dormant, the pixels no longer alight with promise. His finances, a casualty of relentless misfortune, lay in tatters. The remnants of a once thriving career now just whispers of digits in an overdrawn account. The cruel departure of his partner had left an echoing void, the absence of her laughter a haunting refrain amidst the silence of his solitary confinement. The looming threat of homelessness cast a long shadow over him, a relentless specter at the banquet of his woes. Eli's nightly sojourns through the city had become a pilgrimage of sorts, a search for a sign, for some semblance of hope. The streets, bathed in the neon glow of progress, seemed to sneer at his plight, the cacophony of urban life a constant reminder of his isolation. It was on one such evening, as a tempest threatened to break the city's proud stance, that Eli's path veered into the unknown. The rain, indifferent to his sodden clothes, guided him to an alcove where the modern world seemed to have loosened its grip. Nestled between the glossy facades of New Age establishments was the bookstore, an anachronism, its existence almost an act of defiance against the march of time. The sign above the door creaked on its hinges, the words, "Tomes and Tribulations," barely legible under the layers of peeling paint. A bell chimed as he stepped over the threshold, the sound a clarion call to the mysteries that lay within. The air was thick with the musk of aged paper and leather, a fragrance that stirred something primal within Eli's chest. Books of every conceivable genre stood shoulder to shoulder, their spines a mosaic of faded gold lettering and cracked leather. Eli's fingers trailed across them, the tactile sensation a balm to his frayed nerves. In the furthest recess of the store, where the light struggled to penetrate the gloom, Eli's gaze landed upon a particular tome. It was an aberration amidst the order, its cover devoid of title or authorship. The material was unfamiliar to the touch, cold and slightly yielding, as if it were made of a substance not wholly of this world. The symbols on the cover seemed to pulsate with an inner light, their design foreign, yet inexplicably familiar. They beckoned to him, a siren song that seduced his rational mind. And as the storm outside raged with increasing ferocity, Eli found himself opening the book, the creak of its spine like the lament of a forgotten spirit. The pages were yellowed with age, the edges brittle to the touch. But it was the script that drew him in. A language that twisted the tongue and defied comprehension, yet he found himself understanding it as if it were etched into the very marrow of his bones. In the center of the page, a contract awaited, the terms of the agreement inscribed with an elegance that belied its sinister promise. And there, at the bottom, a space for a signature, a void that seemed to call out to him, a whisper in the recesses of his mind urging him to claim a destiny unforetold. With the storm's crescendo as his witness, Eli grasped the pen provided as though compelled by forces beyond the veil of reality. His name, etched onto the parchment, seemed to burn with an unseen flame, the ink seeping into the page like dark blood into parched soil. With the final flourish of his name, the tome snapped shut, as if satisfied with the transaction it had brokered. Eli stood there, his hand still poised above the page, the gravity of his act a growing weight upon his consciousness. A strange lightheadedness took hold, the room spinning, and he could swear that for a moment the books whispered amongst themselves in hushed, sibilant tones. A cold draft swept through the shop, sending papers flying like startled birds. Eli's gaze was drawn to the window where the world outside had taken on a spectral quality. The city's lights bled into one another, the edges of reality smudged beneath the downpour. A part of him, perhaps the part still clinging to the rational world, begged him to chalk it up to an overactive imagination, fueled by the stress that had long been his constant companion. But then, the presence made itself known. At first, it was but a mere shifting in the air, a coalescence of shadows pooling together in the far corner of the room. Eli's heart lurched, a primal fear seizing him as he watched the darkness take on form, growing denser until it stood as a figure cloaked in the absence of light. The figure stepped forward, the darkness clinging to it like a shroud. Where its feet should have made contact with the worn wooden floor, there was no sound. No proof of its existence save for the oppressive energy that filled the room. Eli's breath caught in his throat as the creature, the demon, spoke. Eli's mind reeled. His initial skepticism crumbled as the entity before him radiated a force he could neither deny nor comprehend. This was no trick of the light, no figment of a distressed mind. This was real as the chill that seeped into his bones and the fear that constricted his chest. "What have I done?" he asked himself.
"You have sought refuge from your mortal afflictions,"
the demon replied, its form rippling like a heat mirage.
"In return, you shall serve the depths."
The room seemed to darken with the demon's every word, the candles extinguishing one by one until only a single flame remained, casting a lone, dancing shadow upon the demon's indistinct features. Eli could feel the contract's power within him now, a searing brand upon his very essence. He wanted to protest, to claim ignorance, to recoil from the fate he'd so blindly invited. But the words died in his throat, smothered by the sudden realization of the inescapable truth that wrapped around him tighter than any shroud. He had sought an escape from one nightmare, only to awaken in another, more terrible reality. And with that grim understanding, Eli Turner, once a humble artisan of digital realms, stepped into the gloom of his new existence, the demon's debt collector. In the throes of that revelation, the world as Eli knew it ceased to exist. His senses, once bound by the laws of nature, now transcended beyond. As the final candle extinguished, he expected darkness, but what he saw was the night alive with hues of an otherworldly spectrum. The very essence of life, the auras of beings, and the residue of souls clung to the atmosphere like auroral mists. He stumbled out of the bookstore, the chime of the doorbell sounding distant, a relic of a reality he had departed. The streets, slick with the weeping skies, reflected not just the neon rebellion of the city lights, but also spectral traces of energies unknown to the uninitiated eye. The denizens of the night, oblivious to the transformation of one of their own, passed by him, their lives a transparent tapestry of emotions and thoughts visible to Eli's newfound perception. He saw their fears, their joys, their pain, and their desires, all radiating from them like heat from pavement kissed by the summer sun. As he meandered through the alleys and boulevards of the city that had once been his canvas, Eli found himself at the precipice of despair. His heart, heavy with the knowledge of his newfound servitude, beat a dirge of resignation. How could he reconcile his existence with this infernal burden thrust upon him? It was then that Asmodeus chose to appear once more, his form less nebulous now, more defined. A connoisseur of souls, an aristocrat of the nether. He moved with a grace that was unsettling, his steps silent upon the wet cobblestone. Eli's eyes, once keen for color and form, now discerned the spectral threads that laced the city, a network of obligations, of debts unpaid, of destinies intertwined with entities unseen. He felt a pull, an instinctual tug towards these threads, each one a story, a life, a soul that beckoned. Under the shroud of an uncaring moon, Eli learned the nature of his new existence. He was to be the eyes of the abyss in the mortal world, the hand that would reclaim what was owed. His life, once dedicated to creating, was now repurposed for reclamation. Asmodeus faded into the shadows once more, leaving Eli to grapple with his fate. The city, this vast canvas of souls, was now his hunting ground. And hunt he must, for within him burned the undeniable truth that the pact was sealed, and his duty was irrevocable. In the silence that followed, Eli knew that the coming days would test the very limits of his humanity. He could feel the first assignment stirring in the ether, a call that would not be denied. The life he knew was over, and the path before him was fraught with shadows and whispers, a path that would lead him through the very thresholds of horror and beyond. The world that greeted Eli at the dawn of his first full day as the demon's debt collector was one draped in a veil of twilight half-truths and whispered secrets. The sun itself seemed a mere apparition, its rays filtered through a prismatic lens that revealed the hidden machinations of the spirit world overlaying the physical one. As he walked the streets, his every step was haunted by the awareness of his unholy mission. Eli could see the spectral chains that tethered the indebted to their otherworldly patrons, ethereal links that writhed and pulsed with a malignant energy. With each sighting, a piece of the puzzle fell into place. He was seeing the world not as it appeared, but as it truly was, a market of souls bartered in the shadows. The demon's introduction had been a shock, but the full weight of the contract's terms was a crushing burden. To harvest souls, to be the arbiter of some infernal justice, it was a role Eli recoiled from in the core of his being. Yet, the alternative was a fate too harrowing to contemplate. His own soul cast into the abyss, a currency for the damned. He sought refuge in his apartment, the familiar walls now seeming alien to him. Eli's hands shook as he poured himself a drink, the liquid amber a temporary solace from the gnawing dread. He caught his reflection in the window pane, a man marked by the other world, a stranger to himself. As the day bled into evening, Eli's reluctance was slowly eroded by the spectral phenomena that refused to be ignored. Whispers emanated from the corners of his rooms, and shadows coalesced into forms that were gone when he dared to look directly at them. It was clear the demon's world would not allow him to forget his obligation, to ignore the contract he had so foolishly signed. A reluctant acceptance. It was all he could muster. Resignation led him to open the ancient tome once more, its pages flipping of their own accord to reveal the ledger within, a catalog of names and the debts that bound them. Eli's task was set, his purpose clear. He could no longer afford the luxury of disbelief or the comfort of ignorance. He was the link between worlds, an agent of collection for debts owed to entities whose very existence defied understanding. It was with this somber acknowledgement that Eli closed the book and prepared himself for the road ahead. His life was no longer his own. It belonged to the spaces between, to the darkness that now guided his hand. The following days were a blur of shadows and whispers, of truths half glimpsed in the corner of Eli's eye. He found himself attuned to the ebb and flow of the otherworldly, the cadence of the hidden realm that now governed his existence. With a sense of detachment, he watched as his human connections unraveled, the ties to his former life fraying like threads in a moth-eaten cloth. Friends and acquaintances became distant echoes, their concerns and joys as remote to him as the stars in the firmament. His work, once a source of pride and fulfillment, lay forgotten. His tools, the stylus, the keyboard, the mouse, were untouched, gathering dust. In their place, the tome became his constant companion, its presence a constant reminder of the pact that bound him. Eli's transformation was not merely spiritual. His countenance began to bear the marks of his nocturnal pursuits, his eyes hollows of darkness that spoke of sleepless nights spent in pursuit of the damned. His skin took on a pallor that spoke of the grave, and when he moved, it was with a grace that was unsettling, too fluid, too silent, a mimicry of the living, a rift from normalcy. That was his reality now. He was a creature of the threshold, belonging neither to the light of day nor the dark of night. The city, with its ceaseless pulse and thrum, seemed to him a distant memory, a song whose melody he could no longer recall. It was on a night when the moon hung low, swollen and tinged with red, that Eli received his first assignment. The name was whispered to him not by the demon, but by the very shadows that had become his kin. The name of a soul whose time had come. The mark was a magnate, a man whose empire was built on suffering and sin. His soul, blackened by years of corruption and moral decay, was ripe for the taking. Eli could feel the weight of the man's transgressions in the air, a miasma that clung to the city's underbelly. Asmodeus's instructions were clear. The soul was to be collected, its debt to be paid in full. There would be no mercy, no reprieve. Eli understood the gravity of his task. It was not merely a soul he was to collect, but a message he was to deliver, a declaration of the demon's power and reach. Eli set out into the night, the ledger's pages fluttering in his mind, the name of his quarry burning in his thoughts. The magnate's home was a fortress of opulence, a testament to his earthly power. But Eli knew that behind the gates and the guards, the man was as vulnerable as any other when it came to the debts of the soul. The city watched, its breath held in anticipation, as the demon's debt collector stepped forth to claim what was due. It was the beginning of a saga that would unfold in the hushed tones of those who dared to speak of it, a tale that would leave its mark on the fabric of the city's legends. In the shadows of the world, where the lines between life and death blur, Eli's story was just beginning. A narrative woven from the darkest threads of the human tapestry. A story that would chill the heart and haunt the mind long after the last word was whispered.